Week 4, and I almost forgot to do the video for this week. Normally I've been recording this at Saturday morning. Saturdays are one of the first days of my weekend where I can get stuff done, and I like to just record it right out of the way, use it as a nice time to collect my thoughts for the week, and then I can move on with my weekend to really relax and enjoy myself. But this weekend was a little bit different. I had some stuff come up. I went home, visited some family, and now it's Sunday evening. I'm making my lunch for the week that I can bring to work, and really just wasn't feeling it to sit down and kind of record this video to get it out of the way. And I think in a weird way that kind of speaks to what I've been talking about the past few videos about this idea of doing things even though we don't want to be doing it. Like, for instance, wearing these braces. I've had these on for 4 weeks now, and learning to just accept they are fused to my teeth. I cannot take them off unless I deliberately go to the dentist's office and say, hey, I'm done. And then they got to, get these off somehow. But this is part of a long process. These braces I have agreed to have, and I will push myself through it, adapting to my diet restrictions all the way through the surgery that I'm going to be having in about a year, and to finish off the whole progress for fixing my teeth. Because if I stop now, then what was the point? What was the X amount of dollars that I spent already on these braces then? It's like life has responsibilities for us, and we notice those responsibilities, and we have to choose to accept those responsibilities because we have a choice in accepting them. But do we really? I mean, we have to accept them in order to function more effectively in life. I guess we ultimately do have a choice whether we accept all those responsibilities or not. It is our life and we choose to do it. But putting ourselves in that moment to say that we will be doing this, we will accept the discomfort of taking on this task because this is necessary for my life. It's very similar to, alongside the Stoics back in ancient times, there were the Cynics, and the Cynics would purposefully put themselves through discomfort just to learn how to tolerate pain, because, doing that, it would put everything else into perspective. It would put the other discomforts of life into relative perspectiveness to where you say everything else doesn't matter so much because I have done something much harder. It's very similar to a trend now called the misogi, and this is something that Michael Easter talks about in his book, The Comfort Crisis. Misogis are essentially things that people do. They're intentionally hard, and there are 2 rules. It's got to be really hard, and you can't die. And these are things where literally you are airlifting yourself into the wild to survive for a month. You are purposely deciding to hike around the Grand Canyon just for the sake of doing it. And then once you do that, everything else in life is put into perspective, and everything else seems relatively easy. All the other struggles that we constantly worry about day by day become minuscule, because you realize, if I did this extraneous thing in the past, then who's to say I can't do this small thing right now? Like putting up with someone that you can't really tolerate at work, or supposedly can't tolerate at work. You learn then that the things that really worry you aren't really the things themselves, but they're the thoughts that you have about the thing. And this is something that Donald Robertson talks about in How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. This is a fantastic introduction into Stoicism. One of the concepts he talks about is cognitive distancing. And it's the idea of realizing that when we look at any event that gives us distress, there's really 2 parts to it. There are the facts of the event, and then there are the value judgments. There are how we interpret the situation, how it impacts us in some way. And by doing that, that creates a lot of the roadblocks in our life. So we have to learn to refrain from those value judgments, accept the facts for what they are, and then realize that putting energy into those facts by creating the value judgments is what continues to cause us suffering. And then even Ryan Holiday, he has one of these coins that has a phrase on it, which is, he who suffers before that is necessary suffers more than is necessary. So realizing that certain things can cause us distress, and they can be distress that we accept in our life, but do we really need to accept that distress in the moment, or is it something that we are worrying about in the future? If it's something that's going to be happening a few days from now, why are you worrying about it right now? If you've prepared for it and you've done everything you can, then cease your worrying, because whatever's going to happen in that moment, a few days from that point, is going to happen, and your worrying isn't going to be changing it. So I guess what I wanted to do for this video is to describe how Donald Robertson talks about how we can tolerate the pain that we experience in our lives. And he talks about it in 5 or 6 steps, or 5 or 6 different ways that we can tolerate that pain. The first is what we talked about before, cognitive distancing. It's realizing in the moment when you're feeling distress about something, you can recognize that it's based on the facts and then based on the value judgments that you're basing on the facts. And it's the value judgment itself. It's your interpretation of that. How that event is impacting you is what's causing you distress. It's not the person itself. It's not the event itself. It is your interpretation of it. I feel like I'm a broken record saying that, but it really is, because the event is what it is, and it's going to impact you however it impacts you. But whether that impact affects your life in some way, more often than not, is going to be from how you interpret that impact. The second thing is something he calls functional analysis. It's very related to the idea of cognitive distancing and looking at your value judgments. Functional analysis is really looking at the fear of those consequences, as he puts it. It's recognizing that the fear itself and fearing the fear itself is what's causing us distress. So realizing that being afraid of discomfort and being afraid of pain itself tells us that we can't feel it for some reason. We're essentially telling ourselves that it's unbearable for us to tolerate that level of pain. But more often than not, when we face the discomfort, when we face that pain, we realize that we can face much more than we ever imagined before. And when we're in the middle of that pain, we often realize that it's not as bad as we initially thought it was. Our perceptions blow it way out of proportion than what we initially think that it is. The third thing he talks about is objective representation. And this is a technique that we can do if we feel anxiety. We start this by looking at anxiety itself, if we're going to use that as an example, what the body sensations of it are. People who tend to feel anxiety can have sweaty hands, shortness of breath, knot in the stomach, feeling hot and cold, what have you, getting dizzy. And by feeling those symptoms, that in itself can trigger more anxiety in us, because it could be telling ourselves, I'm scared of something, it means I need to be worrying about something. But instead, we can view that as objective representation, noticing it for what it is. All that it is physical symptoms in the body. The sweating hands is just that. It's just getting sweaty hands. That's it. Getting dizzy, getting lightheadedness, it's just getting dizzy and lightheadedness. The knot in the stomach is just the tightening of the gut muscles or the abs or what have you. And they talk about it in a way where you can view it as symptoms that someone else is experiencing. How would someone else describe their symptoms? Or if you were to observe someone going through the same thing, how would you observe their reaction, their situation, the objective representation of it? That itself separates you from the negative emotions and the negative perception of the situation, because you're, again, looking at it for the facts of what it really is. The fourth thing is depreciation by analysis. And depreciation by analysis is a very complex term for something else that I like to say, getting from point A to point Z, because what it really is talking about is the idea that we tend to see things much bigger than they actually need to be seen. For instance, let's say that we want to become famous, or we want to write a book or write a bestseller book. Let's use that for an example. Thinking about writing a book and, getting a publisher and getting it onto the bestseller list sounds like a monumental task. It sounds like something that is a huge hill to climb. But what you need to do is break it down. It's almost like saying you want to get from point A to point B, when really it feels like getting from point A to point Z. And we need to realize all the other points that are in between point A and point C. For instance, if you're going to be writing a book, you should, understand the topic of the book, understand the theme of the book, and then you could do some research on basic arguments that are already being had about that topic. And then what is your perspective about that topic? You can then take a day to do some research on that perspective. And you really break it up day by day. One day you can outline a certain part of the book, outline all the chapters, and then you could take another day to outline chapter 1. The other day you outline chapter 2, and then maybe you start drafting out chapter 1. It's whatever process you decide for yourself, but you are breaking it up so that it doesn't seem like it's a huge, overwhelming task. Like when I'm doing these videos, this is only the 4th video that I've done, but when I'm going to edit, I'm literally looking at it as a smaller part of this chain of events. I'm seeing that all that I'm doing is really turning on the computer, I'm opening up the editing program, and I'm just going through the video and splicing out the dead parts of what I'm talking. That's it. That's all I'm doing. And if I tell myself that that's all I'm going to be doing for this day, it makes it that much easier, because then I tell myself, is this kind of distress for this video editing where I'm just sitting here and cutting out the dead space, is that something that I can tolerate? Absolutely. That is something I know I can do, because I can get myself to sit down, and I know that it itself is not a hard task. It could be a long task and it can feel like a long process, but it's something that I know I can do. The 5th thing he talks about is something called contemplating finitude and impermanence. I hope I pronounced that right. Finitude. The finite part of this impermanence. So like someone who's experiencing anxiety, if you're experiencing the pain in the gut, you're really trying to tell yourself that it's located in the gut and the pain is there. That's where it lives. And at the same time, you're telling yourself that this pain is not going to stay forever. It's going to be only lasting for a certain amount of time. And for that certain amount of time, I know I can tolerate it. So it's like telling yourself, is the pain either acute or is it chronic? If it's an acute pain, then it's not going to last forever, and you can bear through it then, because eventually it's going to go away. And if it's, chronic, then you can tell yourself that this is something that I am going to sit through. And again, I'm speaking very general on this. I'm sure every case has a unique situation and unique circumstances to it where this may not present itself to be a viable option. But this is just one of the many ways that he talks about that we can choose to try, tolerating the pain of our lives. And then the 6th thing he talks about is just simply stoic acceptance, where you just tell yourself you're going to accept the pain and discomfort of this life. Ultimately, we can get to a point where we say that life inherently has uncomfortable. We can get to a point where we say life inherently has points that are uncomfortable in our lives, that requires us to do things that are things that we just don't want to do. But we learn to accept life and the struggles that come with it. And really, for me, in this process, having braces and having teeth. And for me, for this process of having braces, this is something that I am kind of choosing to accept. I'm in that mode where I'm saying, I'm going to be accepting this discomfort, and I accept it with open arms, and I'm going to be working through it. And by doing that itself removes a lot of the distress about all this, because it just becomes another fact of life that I'm going to be working through. And, life just feels more normal. It feels more bearable. It feels more functional at that point. Needless to say, I'm finding a lot of worth and a lot of value in studying Stoicism as I'm coming through this. I've been listening to this daily Stoic podcast, and Ryan Holiday talk about how 10 years ago, when he was just first writing The Obstacle is the Way, Stoicism was this very, very niche idea, and even his publisher wasn't too keen on him writing a book. He was basically just saying, let's get this out of your system so you could get back to writing about another topic that's much more popular. But really, I think we're finding that as life gets more and more complex for us, we have to learn to deal with those struggles somehow. And learning to tolerate those struggles is going to deal with it in itself, as opposed to trying to remove the struggles from our life. And that's a hard thing. I think that's a very, very difficult thing for us to learn. But I know in my own personal anecdotal experience, me learning it is making life more bearable. So yeah, that's my video for the week. Again, thank you for watching. Thank you for sitting through this with me. I will see you next week for week 5. Take care, everybody. Take care of yourselves.